Good afternoon, I'm Jules Rector.
And I'm Carissa Davis. We begin today with breaking news, a ceasefire in Syria.
The president is fighting a war on two fronts in Syria. He hopes a ceasefire holds after an emergency trip to Turkey by the Vice President and Secretary of State.
And in Washington, as the impeachment inquiry continues, dramatic testimonies on Capitol Hill. We're joined by our political producer, Grace Papish.
Thanks, Carissa. That's right, the U.S. found itself in the middle of two different wars this week, the war in Syria and the war on impeachment. Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were in Turkey this week, where they negotiated a ceasefire between the Turkish military and the U.S.-backed Syrian forces. Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu was quoted saying, "This is not a ceasefire," and that forces will only pause the operation for 120 hours.
That today the United States and Turkey have agreed to a ceasefire in Syria.
The fighting in northeastern Syria began earlier this month when President Trump abruptly pulled U.S. troops out of the region. Many say this left the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Kurds, an ethnic minority, vulnerable to violent Turkish operations and re-emerging ISIS forces. And that's just what happened. As of today, an estimated 200,000 people have been displaced. The president attempted damage control when he sent a letter to Turkish President Erdogan, writing, "Don't be a tough guy, don't be a fool." But despite his attempts, 129 Republicans joined House Democrats to formally condemn the president in a bipartisan resolution. This was followed by a contentious meeting in the Oval Office, in which leading Democrats stormed out after a nasty back and forth between Trump and Pelosi.
He was insulting, particularly to the speaker. She kept her cool completely. But he called her a third-rate politician. He said that there are communists involved and you guys might like that. I mean, this was not a dialogue. It was sort of a diatribe, a nasty diatribe, not focused on the facts.
So Grace, with all this happening in Syria, has the impeachment inquiry been overshadowed?
Definitely not. The impeachment inquiry is moving forward at full speed. In an attempt to defend President Trump's involvement with Ukraine, in which he tried to barter military aid for information on his opponent Joe Biden, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney admitted to reporters that there was an exchange of favors between the two countries.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely, no question about that. But that's it, and that's why we held up the money. And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
And dramatic testimony from the Capitol. Former Ambassador Fiona Hill and Ambassador Gordon Sondland are among those who testified this week. Hill, the president's former advisor to Russia, is on the record saying that John Bolton, at the time National Security Advisor, asked her to tip off White House lawyers days before Trump's July call with Ukraine. And United States Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, who was blocked from testifying last week by the State Department, finally had his day on the Hill. Both testimonies mention the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Hill claimed that John Bolton called Giuliani a hand grenade, and Sondland testified he was directed by the president to work with Giuliani on building an alliance with Ukraine. The president's lawyer may not be able to avoid his hearing much longer. The FBI arrested a fourth man involved in the Ukrainian scheme to funnel foreign money into U.S. elections. Giuliani had business ties to all four men.
Rudy Giuliani has clearly been a leading force for the administration in defining a shadow foreign policy in Ukraine.
Now, taking a look at current polls, 52% of Americans believe Trump should be impeached and removed from office. This is a slim majority of Americans, but it is up nearly 10 points from 3 weeks ago. I'm Grace Papish. Stay informed and stay curious.